Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. Today's webinar, presented by Dušica Popadić of Incest Trauma Center in Belgrade, Serbia, highlights the challenges of those who are working to safeguard children, including their social context, the backlash effect, and discrimination against those who speak out against child abuse. Ms. Popadić will also discuss mitigation strategies for those working in the field today. Right now, I have everyone on mute to avoid background noise. We welcome you to enter your questions and comments in the chat box throughout the presentation. The presenter will answer any questions at the end as time permits. Dušica Popadić, Directress of the Incest Trauma Center Belgrade in Serbia, has provided psychological counseling for adolescent and adult survivors of sexual assault since 1994. She is an accredited trainer with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education of Serbia, as well as with the NSPCC in the United Kingdom, and has served as co-author of the first national study on sexual assault and education materials for primary and secondary schools across Serbia. She is also currently coordinating the first regional network against sexual assault in the Western Balkans. Dušica, we thank you for being with us today and for your many years of dedicated work helping survivors of abuse. Now I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As you heard, my name is Dušica Popadić, and for 25 years I'm working in a specialized service, which is women's NGO, concerned with sexual assault issue. In this presentation and in this webinar, I'll try to speak about some challenges concerning vulnerability and protection of child human rights defenders that are concerned with this field, sexual assault issue. So I'll try to share some of my experience, but mainly it's the experience of Incest Trauma Center, organization that I work in, as well as of the regional network against sexual assault that is for more than a year active in Western Balkan. And I would like first to show you just our logo, which we always really like so much, and people are usually positively reacting, and it is something which is our small identity card. As you see, we are very loudly speaking out on the topic of sexual abuse, and we'll see in this presentation in which way community reacts when you speak very, very loud. The main objective of this webinar is actually to highlight the crucial role of social context, backlash effect, and some challenges in safeguarding the child perspective and childminders' autonomy. What we experienced is that this is the topic that many people around are mainly reacting about who is talking and not what you're talking about. So I'll try to give also some examples about it, but the social context, and especially when you are living and working in Balkan, it is really challenging one. To remind you, this is a territory that had in 1990s, it had wars. There were many challenges regarding responsibility of war criminals. There were many challenges regarding poverty, and there are effects of it still nowadays. So these pretty complex phenomena are still present in one by one country in Balkan. I live in Serbia, And I'll try a little bit to say also about the context in Serbia, but also to underline that neighboring countries, which are actually some organizations that belong to our regional network against sexual assault, they come from neighboring countries that were earlier former Yugoslavian countries, and these are Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, and Serbia. And I'm just pointing out those that were our core team, founding team of regional network against sexual assault. And this network is the first of its kind on this territory. Organizations that are co-founding organizations from these 4 countries are with rich experience in working in the field of violence against children and women, each with more than 20 years of working experience. What I'll try to say also is a little bit to give you an idea about the value base, which is of course a specific one when you come also from women's NGOs, and knowing the history that women's NGOs arised in former Yugoslavian countries mainly during 90s, so during this very complex time in the history. All of us were actually also part of anti-war movement, and we'll come upon that to see why is that important, and why, in which way that is reflecting also nowadays in our work and in the way that we are perceived in community. So this value base is, of course, when you are peace activist, anti-war activist, when you are standing with the women in black that are peace group and loudly being against wars. It's of course also that these are countries that self-organizing of women was always looked as with some kind of suspicion, and something which was not really comprehensive for majority. So in a way, there were and still are numerous barriers, like this identity of being a women's organization, and then being NGO, non-governmental organization, and then working in a field of sexual assault. And if you are working in the field of child sexual assault, so then you see these numerous barriers in the minds of people, because they have to kind of jump over each of these barriers and to look into the content that is offered by such organizations. And when I mention value base, it's also that when you are speaking out against misogynia or xenophobia or homophobia, which is our mandate as human rights organizations, then you have those who are, you would call it simply against, but actually nothing is simple about it. It's a value base that is opposite to the beliefs promoted by church, also ultra right wing, which is of course a little bit overwhelming now, not only in Western Balkan, but as well in Europe, and I would say worldwide. So in that way, these are some phenomena that later on you have, of course, for each step that you make forward, there is some kind of backlash, and that's how we experienced it, each of our organizations in the regional network against sexual assault. And I'll give some examples about it, because we speak about boundaries, about body, about violence, about sexuality. Each of these topics, of course, in our upbringing was not really in favor, or something that parents or other adults were really speaking about it much. What was happening, and I'll give some examples from country to country, and each example is actually very, very recent, unfortunately. I can name that this whole phenomenon about pro-life actions that were in this territory now numerous, organized by the church, and also very subtly, and in Serbia even not subtly but openly, supported by the state. That's something which is of course a worrying trend. In Zagreb, in Croatia, for instance, our colleague from women's NGO called Women's Room, that is working for 25 years on the sexual assault issue, and she's also a lecturer on university. Her subject that is for years there for students is not there anymore, and that's the subject called the psychology of sexuality. And even there was an official paper saying that it is withdrawn because of reactions of the church. So it's something which is really important. It's not masked even, it is open. And at the same time, in Montenegro, there was a couple of months ago the whole campaign that was organized by women's NGOs, just to point out a very, very worrying trend of you would call it in English prenatal tests that were carried out in the aim that women and their partner as well would find out in advance the sex, gender of a baby, and if it is female, then there would be in many cases decision to make abortion. So that's something which was recognized by women's NGOs over there, and very loudly they spoke about this worrying trend. And it's still not something which is resolved. It is a very present topic in Montenegrin society. And of course, sometimes you can get shocked and think, is that possible? And this is 21st century. But yeah, that is something which is kind of practice there, and that's why they are really paying attention of the public. It's also important to know that in all our countries about corporal punishment, that's something which is there is a huge public debate. Not in every country it is something which is in the law. It's even supported by a professional community. Those with numerous prejudices and stereotypes are actually misinforming public, general public, and we have professional, and I wouldn't call, I'm sorry, this person professional, no matter he has enormously a lot of public attention and she is taking public space, enormous public space in all of our countries, and you can find online on internet, you can find video recordings where he's explaining in which way you can hit a child. And again, another shocking information, although it's something which is enormously asked by media to be, it's a person who has enormous media attention, a lot of space in both print and digital media. And in Serbia, 3 years ago, we organized a panel where we invited all associations of different psychotherapy schools that they should publicly inform on their own attitude regarding corporal punishment. In that way, we try to take attention of media and to say that those who are mainly their guests in on television or in print or digital media could not only misuse that position, but that is something which is really important to find adequate guests who are professionals and who are also in accordance with human rights. Because sometimes when we are telling about these cases, people are showing even disbelief, like, is that really possible? So I would just like to pay your attention on it, and it's also very interesting that the same person goes from one country to another and takes the attention and then gets the space to promote such stereotypes, and I would say really make enormous damage. It's also in our experience that people are, when you are speaking about child rights and about child sexual abuse, people are mainly asking, why are you interested in that topic? Why is it you that is speaking out about this? What do you have out of it? What is your interest in it? And then accompanying some kind of either financial or political interest, and although that can be something which is yeah, we cannot understand it as a small community of professionals that we are now exchanging about this, but that is the case. And sometimes their reactions in terms of is it really that maybe something happened to you? Do you have personal history of violence, and that's why you are speaking about that? Or many times it's some kind of attacking your personality, and we know that from our own experience that when you are, especially when you are working in a women's NGO, you can be attacked based on your sexuality and or assumed sexuality. That's even more frequent this case. And I think it's really important to understand, and I can imagine no matter from which country you come, that some prejudices and some stereotypes, and that you're not in favor of some majority when you work on sexual abuse, that you can recognize. I'm sure about that. That's not something which is typical or only happening in Balkan or in Serbia. But I'm sure that we can share this experience in certain way and to certain extent. And sometimes it is also what we came upon when you are thinking about majority that is reacting about this topic, or organizations that are involved in this field. It's also about some personal processes and some internalized attitudes that is in majority. And I mentioned it's mainly a way of thinking, like who is talking, estimating who is that one, evaluating, in terms of suspecting, and not really what you are talking about. And I said about these identities and about social context in this territory, that when you were in anti-war movement or you are advocating for LGBTIQ rights, then it's something which is a barrier that people won't listen that easily about child rights or child sexual abuse, which is your primary mission, actually. And then you have this interested, you would call it socially engaged, responsible minority. You also have observers, and I would call it also bystanders, because it's important to know that in Serbia, just 5% of general population is ready to report that there is child sexual abuse in a family that they know. So just 5%, and that's official statistical data for this country. So many bystanders, many of those who are not taking action, even if they are suspecting or they get to disclosure about child sexual abuse. And also, what we met in our experience, of course, there are survivors in that when you're looking around and seeing who are those that you are meeting while you are doing your mission, survivors and their supportive persons. And of course, then you have this group of offenders, and then you have those that I earlier called them those who are against. And in our experience, this group of offenders, as well as those who are against this topic and the action in this topic, they are from time to time connecting with each other. So we also saw backlash in that way, that or we saw organized groups of offenders who also get some public space, and they speak publicly. And I would like also to mention two most frequent, I would call it, attitudes, which are also reflected not only towards survivors but also to helpers, those of us who are active in organizations in this field. And one is just not trusting the statement of the victim, of survivor, mistrust. And a second one, what I already mentioned, it is about personal responsibility to react. These two most frequent attitudes, both of citizens but also of professional community, that's what we are mainly facing. And when I say mistrust regarding statement of survivor, it's also questionable the level of trust when you as a worker is speaking about, for example, data. I will give you this situation when Incest Trauma Center was national leader of 1 in 5 campaign of Council of Europe for the Republic of Serbia. For almost 5 years we were doing this job, and as we all know, 1 in 5 is the title of campaign. And each time when we would say this title, actually data about Europe, there was not only disbelief but a lot of resistance. And again, who is telling that? Why are you, for instance, there were all kind of even questions from media. Why are you misinforming public that this is in Serbia? And of course, you say we don't have, at that moment, we didn't still have a national study on prevalence and incidence of child sexual abuse, but we were saying this is data of Council of Europe. We didn't say that it is in Serbia. In Serbia, we still don't know, and that we don't know, that means that state is still keeping taboo, because without figures, what can you do? And so there were all kinds of reactions in that way. And in 2015, for the first time in Serbia was done first national study on prevalence and incidence of child sexual abuse. And the Incest Trauma Center, organization that I'm working in, did it together with Ministry of Education and one other women's NGO called Center for Promotion of Women Health Promotion Center. Sorry. So we did it together, and in 2015, for the first time, we had a data, and data were saying the following: that in every the sample was from 10 to 18 years old. Children were of that age, children and young people. And it turned out that in every school class in Serbia, and we counted 30 students in the class. 4 students experienced personally sexual abuse, and other 4 in that same class knew friend, both boy or girl, female or male friend, who experienced some form of sexual abuse. So it's about prevalence, and about incidence. 2 children from each class in Serbia on this age experienced sexual abuse in last 12 months. So these were also data that were at the first moment shocking, but still Ministry of Education was standing behind this national study, so it got very serious, the whole atmosphere and the public debate, and it was something which was seriously taken. And this same study showed that 2/3 of children and youth that were in this sample, they disclosed it. And those who were in primary school, they spoke mainly to family members. And those who were in secondary school, they spoke to peers. And it turned out that only 7% of those who listened, who had these disclosures heard, only 7% of them took action. So that was also something which was really alarm. I would say that word only. And why is it something that people are not believing what we learned about it? Is because personally, it's very difficult to believe that someone would hurt sexually a child. Sometimes people are visualizing that violent act, and then they don't want even to think about it. They are just turning their head. That sometimes they're saying that it can't be this child, or it can't be this offender. And also, what was important, and it was later on also there was evidence in this national study, it is that just very few percent of both secondary school students, but also parents, believed that the recovery is possible at all. So I think this whole context and is actually important, because we can all recognize the atmosphere around the topic of child sexual abuse. And instead of taking personal responsibility, usually what we faced was why should I react, or I didn't see it really, I was not there, maybe someone else will react instead of me. Or, for instance, not understanding also in professional community that when you are working in this field, the activism, personal activism, is of course enormously important. It is part of your job, if I may say it in that way, but people are just not used to it. Professionals are just thinking, if especially when employed in state institutions, they're just not used to the whole activistic part. And in a way, that whole responsibility of understanding the social context and working within the social context, that is still lacking. Besides, it is also about lacking role models. Who would be role models? When I described these social circumstances in our countries here in the region, then being an NGO is with some kind of a negative label as well, because of arising, being established and developing during wars, because that whole connection is something which is actually not helping in minds of people. And also it is promoted by media, meaning also state, that still the role of NGOs remains either vague or negative one. So instead of analyzing your own attitudes, internalized attitudes, it is usual the whole victim blaming notion, unfortunately, and also it's blaming those who are messengers, those who are speaking loudly about child sexual abuse. And I would like to point out that the whole um, uh, getting out of your own comfort zone is something which still remains really very high aim for I would call it majority, especially for those from professional community. And now I would like to say a couple of words regarding concrete examples, how the rights of child rights defenders were violated, in which way. And before that, I'll say I'll go from this regional level to to Serbia, and this is Trauma Center. Belgrade. Belgrade is the capital of Serbia with about 2 million people living there. Incest Trauma Center is there for 25 years. I'll name just some, I would call it results, among which is being a country can partner of ITCAN, and or as well, I would say, for instance, that being the national leader for Council of Europe is one of results for 1 in 5 campaign for Serbia, as well as it's important to know that Serbia is the second country in Europe where the statute of limitation concerning sexual offenses against children is rescinded, so it's abolished. We don't have it. And it is from 2013, upon initiative of Incest Trauma Center Belgrade, a Parliament of Serbia voted anonymously that a statute of limitation should be rescinded. So that's one thing also important, because as we know, only United Kingdom has this legislative measure which is recognizing long-term effects of child sexual abuse and providing the space for prosecution also years later, when a child or adolescent later has this I would call it psychic strength, but also social power really to go through the whole criminal prosecution, the whole process. So in that way, I would also name some of results which would, I think, later on also help in understanding case examples of endangerment, because in 2015, as I said, we did this first national study together with Ministry of Education, and then the same year we wrote the first strategy in education concerning prevention of child sexual abuse. So it's the first national document in Serbia regarding prevention. In that way, it is important and kind of historical. And then in 2016, what we did was we introduced the topic of child sexual abuse, the whole, I would call it not just the topic, but we introduced a systemic learning on child sexual abuse issue into national curricula. And when I call it national curricula, I mean in kindergartens, primary and secondary schools. That was also together with the Ministry of Education. So in kindergartens from the age of 3 to 7, and as well in primary schools and secondary schools, it's the whole of 10 regular subjects in schools that have at least minimum 2 units, learning units that are dedicated to sexual assault issue. It is at 2016. It is something which we, after 9 years of lobbying, we did it together with the Ministry of Education. Later on, I will tell you what happened afterwards, and it belongs to this topic of vulnerability of not just child rights defenders, but vulnerability of the topic itself, actually. So that's something which I would name as some results. It's also that we founded the national network of kindergartens and schools against sexual assault, together with Ministry of Education as well. And what is also what I find very important, we made the first movie that was in 2010, the first movie which is 1.5 hours lasting, the real movie, what children would say, a real movie, TV movie, based on true testimonies of adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And this movie got a State Excellence Award for raising awareness and prevention regarding sexual assault. And the movie was, for instance, screened in 4 countries in the region, and it was more than 40 times on television upon public request. That's also, I think, one of the interesting things about it. So these are just some ideas about our results, and I will try to give you in spite of it, and we even find that we were an organization that was, how would you call it, one of most praised, or maybe the most praised one, because of its approach, and because of strategy, and because of taking care of social context, and developing activities that were also evaluated by survivors as something which follows their interest. And then on the other side, you have some other process, and it is about vulnerability and about necessity to get protected as a child rights defender, but also it's about vulnerability of the topic itself. And I'll give some examples. For instance, years ago, we had this moment that Ministry of Education of Serbia, before we started cooperating in the way that as I listed, it was just, I would call it, there were unpleasant situations, and we recorded it as experienced trainers, that it turned out that during our training, accredited training by Ministry of Education, there were 2 participants who were, at the moment that you say the word child sexual abuse, they laughed. Probably you can't believe that it might happen something like that. I was in that training, so I was really kind of shocked. I didn't understand what was happening. I assumed that probably it had nothing to do with the topic, but maybe they were just like kids in at school, telling each other something which was not connected. But it turned out that 2 or 3 times when I asked what's going on, it turned out that they didn't want to say what's going on. Afterwards, they were repeating the same behavior, and at one moment I asked them to leave. They left to their school. They were back there, and since they didn't have certificate, and they still took time out of their work for this training, what they did, they said that over there was some kind of propaganda regarding lesbian issues. And they said there was one leaflet, and of course we, as every organization, we have a lot of leaflets regarding human rights. They said this was something which was promoted there. And it was interesting because in the same training, there was representative from Ministry for Education, so they knew that this was not, of course, happening. But still, we were called by one employee from Ministry saying, "We know that was not the case, but still we have to react because this is the complaint that we got." And it was very interesting because we were phoned. So there was no any written document, nothing in a way that would be clear or that there is evidence about it. So it was just phoning. So there is no evidence that we were even so-called accused of anything. Of course, we said that everything what was said on the phone should be sent in written, and this never came to us. So that's very interesting. And then the other thing which I would like to mention, it was coming from donors' side. So those who are funders giving money. It turned out that in one of our projects, at that moment, there was a high-profile case of bishop, but it is from Serbian Orthodox Church, who was accused of sexually abusing 4 boys. And by then, there was still this statute of limitation. So that was something which was for very long. The whole trial was for very long. There, all the time transferred from one judge to another, just wasting time. And in our report to donor, we said that we have this unexpected outcome in terms of we wanted to make a video game that would be dedicated to prevention of child sexual abuse, but that we would like to point out that sexual abuse happens also in the church by church officials. And donor was saying that if we are going to put that in our report, we wouldn't get the last installment of our grant. So it was an open request, again by phone, that's interesting, saying that we should put that out, that whole idea, and just to submit report without this information. Of course, we didn't do it. And when you ask about mitigation strategy, we again said that this should be in written, sent to us, and then we are going to react again in written. So that never came. Pressure was in terms of many phone calls asking completely the same question, but we didn't give in. And what is also important, and why I would like to give that example as well, it is, for instance, that we had a lot of situations. Sometimes it happened in the training, but it regularly happens in the court, and that is also nowadays very intense. When my colleague, who is medical doctor, and she is a leader of our team working with sexually assaulted children, when she goes as a witness in the court after we provide psychological assistance to a child, many times she is asked who is financing Incest Trauma Center, what is the reason that Incest Trauma Center is at all founded. Then all kinds of questions that are about her marital status, how many children she has. And that is approved by judges. So of course we all know the hierarchy in the court. And at the same time, the offender's lawyer gets that space to ask all kinds of questions which are not only not relevant, but in a way that shouldn't be allowed at all. So that's, I think, also some of important situations that we are going through. It's also important to mention that it's the same about court trials. When it turns out that our expert opinion differs from other professionals who are who the child saw them somewhere in the whole procedure. It turned out a couple of times that the court asked that all these professionals should be working as a special committee that is organized just for that case. And it turned out several times that the one who is the chair of that committee didn't invite Incest Trauma Center at all for the session when there was exchange of the whole team of that committee. And then later on, what happens is that when you just get the kind of invitation from the court saying that you should appear in the court, and then in this invitation, it's written some kind of threat that you would be with the fine because you didn't show up on that meeting. And of course, you cannot show up on the meeting if the chairperson is not sending you invitation at all. And it happened each time when our expert opinion differed from the rest of members of this committee. So that's another thing. And I'll give one more example. Sometimes it is possible, we face that the daily politics interferes with the case of child sexual abuse. And you have different political options that they're interested in deploying their personnel. And when you are when they are expecting, like, you should give some kind of, with quotation marks, some kind of certificate that sexual abuse took place, and of course you are not going to do that in that way. Then also there are all kinds of unpleasant situations, including intimidations. And I'll close this part of speaking, just my speaking, with saying about mitigation strategies that it is really very important, not only about being responsible as a professional. I think it's about being responsible as a human being. And I'll give one example in which way we took care of being consistent, and I would call it also being with dignity. As I earlier mentioned, in 2016, we introduced, together with Ministry of Education, learning on child sexual abuse into national curricula of kindergarten, primary and secondary schools. This was the process of 1 year writing the content for 10 subjects in schools, and also the program for 3-year-old ones to 7-year-old ones. That's how it is in our system here in Serbia, this age. And it was together with Ministry of Education. It was a team of 27 people, 21 from education, employed in educational institutions. At the end of this process, it was announced in rectorate, the highest place at Belgrade University, in some ceremony hall. Minister of Education gave these certificates and thank you cards to all authors. And what happened was that after 5 months, we had the promotion of it's called educational PACs. And what happened was that after 5 months in social networks, a small group of those who are belonging to ultra-right wing and also church, they made negative campaign about educational PACs. And no matter, there is no written proof, nothing in written from the ministry. Minister was through media announcing that educational PACs would be put on standby for a while, not to be used. So that pressure in social networks was like it was showing that those guys are stronger than the state. So it's enormously paradoxical, it's absurd, but it is our experience. And I would invite everyone to share experiences, how community reacts when you speak out on child sexual assault issue. And also, I would like to announce that by the end of this year, we are going to prepare a collection of case examples and as well mitigation strategies listed by colleagues from many, many organizations. And we are going to share it through ISPCAN network because we want to break silence and isolation among child rights defenders about their vulnerable position in society, but also vulnerability of this topic. Thank you very much. I would like to answer any question which would be there.
Okay, thank you so much, Jusisha, for sharing this important information and for all of the very important work that you have done in Serbia. Despite the cultural difficulties in addressing this issue, you are making lots of great progress, and it seems like there is reason to be hopeful. We have some questions for you from the audience. First, you have had the support of the Ministry of Education, and you've had some successes with laws and policies. You also have a new female prime minister. Can you talk a little bit more about the level of support you have now from the government regarding sexual violence against women and children?
Thank you very much. I understand that some of participants are familiar with the first person from lesbian community who is Prime Minister of Serbia, and that's for the first time in this country. What I said a year ago, it happened this with the educational packs. The last example that I gave, that it was in national curricula, and at one moment it's put on standby. Government didn't oppose this. I said that it was something which was done through social networks, which is very, very strange that something like that could happen with the whole ownership of Ministry of Education regarding educational packs, and integrating it as sustainable systemic solution. So in this year, government still didn't react differently than one minister who was saying through media that it's going to be on standby.
Okay, so are there current is there more legislation that's being proposed, or what do you see for the immediate future as far as the government's support?
I do not see it. I mean, I'm one of co-founders, so I'm in this field really long, especially when you look at this in Serbia. I cannot say that there will be specific support regarding this issue in near future by government.
Okay, all right. Another attendee had a question about religion. You spoke quite a bit about the support or lack of support from the church. It sounds like the cultural beliefs about abuse and sexuality are rooted in religion. Do you think this leads to a higher rate of sexual abuse in the country? And has the church done anything effective to address these issues?
No, church didn't do anything to address these issues. No one can say whether that is reinforcing prevalence of child sexual abuse. There are no such data. But I wouldn't call it that it is trend which is just here in Balkan. It is something, this organizing of clerical and ultra-right-wing forces. It's something which we are all facing in Europe and also wider than that. So it's more whether we are recognizing when the threat starts, and that's why I was speaking about pro-life and pro-choice. And it's more that we are not alert enough in the first moment, the first warning sign, because they are very well organized.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Um, and next there was a question about, you mentioned corporal punishment. Um, could you talk a little about the current public attitudes toward corporal punishment and if they are changing, and what laws exist in the schools, or if the church has a position on that?
In Serbia, it is still not regulated. It's still prolonged this so-called public debate, but there is actually no public debate. You wouldn't call it that way. What is lacking is to have some clarity in attitude of the state, because what we were trying to influence uh, uh, government, I would call it that way, was to carry out a national campaign so that it should be for every citizen clear information that state is advocating about stopping corporal punishment, but that didn't happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Um, I guess I had a question about the study that you did. It's wonderful that you were able to collect this kind of data. That's a starting point for change. I just wonder a little bit more about your experience with overcoming some of these attitudes that you've described in conducting your study. What was it? What kind of challenges did you have in actually carrying out the study?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. For instance, it was interesting. Of course, participation in the study was voluntarily, and although ministry explained to schools why it is important to take part, they still had this room to say no. So from 120 schools, 44 were those who said no. And many times it was the explanation like we don't have these problems. Child sexual abuse is not happening. We didn't make any evidence of such cases, so we shouldn't be in this study. So that was one of the things. And it was also on the side of teachers, school personnel. They were all the time hesitant how to approach parents, because the study was including also parents and parents of uh, those children who were in primary schools. And so we had to do parallel process. It was kind of educating teachers in which way they should approach parents and speak with them at all, just for this purpose of study. And at the same time, with the you would call it with children, it was easiest. It was very important data for me. That was something really important. Uh, 49% of children and youth, this age of 10 to 18, they said that for the first time in their life, they spoke with someone about this topic within our study. So before that, no one spoke with them about it.
Okay. Okay, great. And one last question. You have been very courageous in the kind of persecution you have faced, and in protecting yourself and your cause. And we're wondering if you can give advice to those who are in a similar situation with this kind of these attitudes and backlash.
Yeah, I think that it is really very important to be responsible professional. So to have expertise, to stand behind your expertise, to learn all the time to learn about the topic, and then you can really speak in public. Then, okay, all these processes, the whole backlash, everything will happen, but still our experience is saying that you are someone respected by majority.
Yes, okay, thank you. Okay, well, we are out of time. I want to let our audience know that a recording of this webinar and a PDF version of the slides will be available within 24 hours on our website at ispcan.org. We encourage all of you to become a member of our organization so that we can continue having informational webinars like these in the future. If you are interested in presenting or have ideas for topics, please let us know at resources@ispcan.org. We would also like to take this opportunity to invite you to join us in Prague, September 2nd to the 5th, for our 22nd International Congress. Registration is now open on the conference website at ispcan2018.org. There you can find information about our keynote speakers and the core competency courses and pre-conference events that we are offering. Thank you again, Dushisa, for your time today and for all of you who are listening. We hope you have a good day or night, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and best greetings to all.